And we are ready to begin. Where am I? Okay, here I am. Hello! Welcome to another episode of Torn Book Club on this July 19th, 2015. My coaster is stuck. There we go. I have to clean this table. My name is Saruman, also known as Josh, and I am your host, if you haven't realized that already. And we have been discussing for the last few months, and will continue discussing through the end of September, the Silmarillion. And at this point, I'm sure most of you tuning in are very well aware of this, and are probably looking forward to today's episode. We didn't have an episode last week because, it was Comic-Con, and I wanted to keep the channel open for Comic-Con coverage, but we did have a panel on last Friday, which I don't know if any of you made it to. The topic of discussion, I'm going to give you a quick rundown, just because I don't know if there's any recording of the panel, since they don't let us record officially in the panel room, and I don't know if anybody was sneaky. Keely has been asking around for anybody who may have gotten footage of the panel so that she can put it in the upcoming Happy Hobbit video, but I don't know if she's gotten any leads on that yet. So for now, all we have is our retelling of the panel. It's the topic of the discussion was what's next for Tolkien fans, because after November, when we get the extended Battle of the Five Armies, that's pretty much it. And we were discussing what could be done in a quote-unquote Middle-earth cinematic universe, what other stories they could possibly use, because they are very limited in what they can use. They can't use anything from the Silmarillion. They can't use anything from Unfinished Tales. They can't use Children of Hurin. They're basically limited to The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and whatever is in the appendices of The Return of the King. Now, Cliff Quickbeam and I were discussing before the panel that this sort of creates maybe sort of a case-by-case basis of what you could or could not make a movie out of, because there are many references to many things in the appendices, but they don't tell the full story, and to get the full story you need to go to books that the studios don't have the rights to. So it's this very weird tightrope balance that needs to be done, and also there's the possibility of just going completely off book and doing movies about Legolas's search for Aragorn, or whatever the heck Tariel ends up doing. There is potential for more movies. There's also like the possibility of doing a movie about Balin and him trying to rebuild Moria. My only you're hearing a weird noise, Eruvandi? What are you hearing? What is the weird noise? Okay, hang on. There we go. Okay, so that takes care of that. Sorry about that. My air conditioning was on, and I guess it when it's running, it rattles the table that the microphone is on, and that causes that weird buzzing noise. So I will forego the air conditioning for now and just sweat while I do the show. So anyway, the one of the things that we could we were talking about in the panel was, like, I think I left off. We were talking about a possibility of doing a movie about Balin and his rebuilding of Moria, and my sort of trepidation about a movie like that is that we know how it ends, and it's not a happy ending. And I don't know if a lot of audiences will go for something like that. But we got a lot of questions. There were some criticisms we had of the Battle of the Five Armies. I've talked about it at great length on this show. And if you haven't watched it, the episodes are in our YouTube archive. I won't rehash everything. So yeah, that was our Comic-Con panel. Hopefully there is footage of it somewhere, because it was a fun discussion. And I also I ended the panel by telling everybody what I always tell everybody, which is this: Tolkien fandom isn't going anywhere. Even if we don't have a movie or a TV show in the next 5 or 10 years, we still have each other, we still have fandom, we still have the One Ring, we still have our shows. So Tolkien fandom isn't going anywhere. It was here long before the movies, it'll be here long after the movies. So we don't need a movie to rally around to sort of build up our community, because our community is very strong. So that's all I have to say about that. So before we get into the Silmarillion discussion, just a reminder that our book of the month for July is The Princess Bride by William Goldman. Many of you are probably familiar with the movie. The movie is very good, and the book and screenplay are by the same man, William Goldman. And the book is a very bizarre one. Now, I've got the 30th anniversary edition, which comes with some extras. It comes with a couple new introductions by William Goldman. It also comes with the first chapter of the sequel to The Princess Bride, called Buttercup's Baby. So we may be discussing that a little bit. I also, just for funsies, read As You Wish, the book by Carrie Elwes that's about the making of the movie The Princess Bride, and it's a very fun read, so we may talk about that as well, or I may talk about that. You don't need to read it, you don't need to read this, you don't need to read anything. We're just going to talk the book. We're just going to talk about the book. Yeah, it's that'll be on August 2nd. We'll be talking about that. So that's that. That's everything leading up to our big discussion today, which is the Silmarillion, and more importantly, the conclusion of the story of Beren and Lúthien. So let's bring up the big board, and we shall begin. Where is the thingy? There is the thingy. And what is Eravani saying, I'm in the middle of a rather large fantasy book right now, but I would like to read The Princess Bride sometime when I get around to it. It's a good read. I do recommend it. So Beren and Lúthien, we're going to do a quick recap of what happened 2 weeks ago. We had Beren and Lúthien. They met in the forest of Doriath and quickly fell in love. And Beren was in Doriath unbidden and unwelcome, and so he eventually went before King Thingol and professed his love for Lúthien, and Thingol said, I won't have any of that. if you want the hand of my daughter, you need to do the impossible and sneak into Angband and steal a Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth. And Beren says, okay, I'll do it. And he goes and he recruits Finrod Felagund, the king of Nargothrond, who owes a debt to his family, and he swore an oath to help his family in their time of need, and so Beren asks him to fulfill that oath, which he does, and he recruits a number of people to go with Beren, and as they leave, they are almost immediately captured by Sauron. Sauron imprisons them in his fortress called the Island of Werewolves. And then Lúthien leaves Doriath to find Beren, and on the road she is captured by the two brothers Celegorm and Curufin, who are kind of refugees in Nargothrond, and they are right now attempting a coup against Finrod while he is away. And while Lúthien is in prison, she meets Celegorm's hound Huan. Huan befriends her and eventually helps her escape from Celegorm and Curufin. Oh, that's too much. And meanwhile, in Sauron's tower, Finrod Felagund ends up defending Beren against a werewolf attack / interrogation, and he is killed in the process. And Lúthien and Huan eventually reach Sauron's tower and begin to attack all of the werewolves there. And Huan kills the father of werewolves, Draugluin, and then eventually Sauron himself takes werewolf form, comes out and fights Huan, and Huan defeats him, and Lúthien banishes him. And she takes control of Sauron's tower and releases all the prisoners, but can't find Beren until she sees that he is in fact still grieving over the death of Finrod. And so they bury Finrod Felagund, and now the choice is upon them what to do next. To go back to Doriath and say that the quest has failed, to try to continue the quest, or to just live on the run for the rest of their lives, which, if you know Lúthien, is a forever kind of thing. And so that is where they have left off. And that's where we've left off. And so we begin back in Nargothrond. This is where Celegorm and Curufin have been fomenting dissent against Felagund this entire time, and they've been doing a very good job. Felagund had left the stewardship of Nargothrond in the hands of his brother Orodreth, and they have pretty much wrested all control away from him, and it's a very perilous time to be in Nargothrond right now. But then all of the prisoners from Sauron's tower return, and they see what's been going on, and they start to tell the story of the maiden who rescued them from Sauron, while Celegorm and Curufin, who were supposedly the leaders, stayed behind and walled themselves in Nargothrond, and basically took the coward's way of trying to usurp power for themselves. And they stage a revolution, and basically they reinstate Orodreth as the rightful ruler and now the king of Nargothrond, and banish Celegorm and Curufin and they were going to kill them, but Ordreth said, no, that they deserve a long life of destitution, so let them go. And so they're banished from Nargothrond. And that's what's been going on there. Now, meanwhile, Beren and Lúthien have a decision to make. They've left the tower. Huan has also gone back to Nargothrond because he is the Hound of Celegorm, and he is a loyal hound. So he's gone back to serve his master. So it's just Beren and Lúthien, and they're very slowly kind of ambling, making their way back towards Doriath, and they're walking the woods, which I still believe is a euphemism, but it eventually gets to a point where Beren says, you know what? I still have this quest for the Silmarils I gotta take care of. I have to do this, otherwise it will just be us wandering. And so he makes the decision that he is going to go to Angband, and he is going to he's going to steal a Silmaril, and he is going to fulfill the quest, and he is going to win the hand of Lúthien the legitimate way. And then that's when, on the road, they happen to run into, they see them. The recently banished Celegorm and Curufin come upon them. And they see Beren and Lúthien, and, of course, with Celegorm and Curufin is Huan, because he is a loyal hound after all. And so they decide, well, there is still I should move that down there. There's still value in Lúthien, and also they're kind of vengeful. So Curufin tries to kidnap Lúthien, at which point Beren does the unthinkable and basically leaps onto his horse and grabs Curufin by the neck, pulls him to the ground, and begins to strangle him. And Celegorm tries to take out Beren, and that's when Huan finally, after all this time, turns on his masters and defends Beren. And eventually, Celegorm and Curufin are dehorsed, they're de-weaponed. Beren takes everything from them and says, you can now just walk back to wherever you were going. Because they were trying to make their way back to the other sons of Feanor. But in everything that he's taken, Beren also takes a special knife called Angrist. Now, one of the things I noticed is that the knife that Aragorn uses in the Fellowship of the Ring when he is fighting Lurtz, when he the dagger that he tosses at Lurtz that gets embedded in his leg is also called Angrist, and this is a picture of that dagger. I do not believe they are the same dagger, and I won't say why because that's spoilery for later on. But regardless, this is a special blade because it was created by the elves specifically for Curufin, I believe, is the one who possessed it. And it's a very sharp blade, and it can cut through steel like it was green wood, as Tolkien puts it. And this knife will come into play later. So now, and it also should be mentioned that as they're leaving, Celegorm, I believe. Let me take a look here. Go hence, he said, unto a swift and bitter death. Okay, so it was Curufin. Basically, when their backs are turned, he takes his bow and shoots an arrow at them, and it's aimed for Lúthien. And Huan, being the awesome hound that he is, grabs the arrow in midair. But while he's doing that, Curufin shoots another arrow at Lúthien, and this time Beren leaps in front of the arrow and takes it right in the chest. And Huan, after this, just takes off after Celegorm and Curufin, chases them down while Beren is basically bleeding out and dying. But after the chase, Huan comes back with a special herb. Now, he doesn't say specifically what kind of herb in the book. I like to assume it's Athelas, only because that's the only one that's ever used. But he brings back a special herb, and Lúthien uses it to heal Beren's wounds. So he doesn't die. But this becomes, like, Beren in peril is kind of a running theme in this story. So they recover, and eventually Beren recovers slowly. And it's the three of them sort of taking their time, languishing in the woods while Beren recovers. But when it finally comes down to it, Beren knows that he has to keep going. He has to move on to Angband, and he doesn't want to bring Lúthien with him. He doesn't want to put her in that peril, even though they have had many discussions about this, and basically Lúthien's attitude is this: you must choose, Beren, between these two, to relinquish the quest and your oath and seek a life of wandering upon the face of the earth, or to hold your word and challenge the power of darkness upon its throne. But on either road I shall go with you, and our doom shall be alike. So Lúthien is insistent that she is going to go with him. So Beren instead decides to sneak out during the night, to sneak away during the night. And he gets away and makes it as far as the plains of Anfauglith, which is a large plain in front of Angband, which used to be a very beautiful plain until the Dagor Bragolach, the Battle of the Sudden Flame, when Thangorodrim, the mighty mountain, erupted and covered the whole thing in ash and dust and flame and terror. And so now it's this giant wasteland. And this is sort of him entering the domain of evil. And I know we've been joking about this a bit, but there is more singing. Beren begins to sing a song for Lúthien as he enters these desolate, terrible lands. And it goes like this: farewell, sweet north and northern sky, forever blessed since here did lie, and here with lissom limbs did run beneath the moon, beneath the sun, Lúthien to Nuviel, more fair than mortal tongue can tell, though all to ruin fell the world, and were dissolved and backward hurled, unmade into the old abyss. Yet were its making good for this, the dusk, the dawn, the earth, the sea, that Lúthien for a time should be. And Lúthien hears him and chases after him with Huan. Now, Huan has a special ability to travel in disguise, and he's able to make himself look like one of the servants of Morgoth, and he disguises himself as the werewolf father Draugluin, and then he disguises Lúthien as a messenger known as Thuringwethil, and she is a messenger of Sauron. She's also a vampire bat, and so after singing this song, Beren suddenly sees a werewolf and a vampire bat descend upon him, and luckily he doesn't do anything too rash, and soon realizes that it is in fact Lúthien and Huan. And it's at this point Huan has his second experience with being able to speak with words. Part of his fate is that he will be able to speak with words 3 times before his death. This is the second time. The first time was with Lúthien when she was in prison. And basically, Huan basically says to Beren, she is going to go with you whether you like it or not. You're going to have to accept this. You can turn from your fate and lead her to exile, seeking peace in vain while your life lasts. But if you will not deny your doom, then either Lúthien, being forsaken, must assuredly die alone, or she must with you challenge the fate that lies before you, hopeless yet not certain. And what is Light of the King is asking, I've forgotten, when Aragorn is singing in Fellowship, do we know which song he is singing? Aravandi's right. He's singing part of the Lay of Lúthien, which is the entire story of Beren and Lúthien set to song, which is Lúthien means release from bondage. And I Stole the One Ring is saying, I never expected vampires in Tolkien's book. I know, it's a little weird, and like he doesn't focus on them, but they do exist, which is a very weird thing. It is not something you'd expect. So here, after Huan counsels Beren to basically saying, you might as well, you're gonna have to take Lúthien with you. Like, this is just how it's going to be. He then says, now on this part of the road, I can't go with you. My path lies on a different road, but I have a feeling that we will meet again before the end. And so Huan bids them farewell, but not before cladding them in disguise again, this time with Beren, disguised as Draugluin. And so, through the plains of Anfalglith, this is now what Beren and Lúthien look like. Beren is now Draugluin, the leader of the werewolves, and Lúthien is the giant vampire bat Thuringwethil. And they do this so that they can get through unscathed and unharmed, and they make it all the way up to the gates of Angband. They have made it all the way to Angband, finally. And at the gates, they encounter something they weren't expecting. A giant werewolf named Carcharoth. And this was a special werewolf This is a werewolf that was specially made by Morgoth, because Morgoth heard rumors that Huan was out and about, and he knew the prophecy that Huan would be killed only by the greatest werewolf in the land. And so he set about making the greatest werewolf in the land. And so he took this werewolf from a pup and raised it and corrupted it and made it just an ungodly hell beast. And so and but Beren and Lúthien are in disguise, so Karkaroth doesn't immediately kill them. But he is suspicious because he knows that Draugluin was killed. And so he's challenging them at the gate, and then Lúthien takes off her disguise, reveals herself, and then casts a spell on him, sending him to sleep. She does have that ability. Where is this? She actually, she yells something at him. Oh, and Karkaroth has so many awesome nicknames. The Red Maw, the Jaws of Thirst. Yeah, so she commands him to sleep. She says, "Oh, woe-begotten spirit, fall now into dark oblivion, and forget for a while the dreadful doom of life." And with that, Karkaroth is put to sleep. And so Beren and Lúthien, still in disguise, begin to make their way into Angband. The first time anybody who was not either a servant of Morgoth or a prisoner has been in Angband. And they begin making their way down until they finally eventually get to Morgoth himself on his throne, deep in the pits of Angband, still in disguise. Now, Morgoth can tell almost immediately that Thuringwethil is not Thuringwethil. And Lúthien sort of beats him to the punch on this and reveals herself to him. And offers herself up as sort of a minstrel or a dancer for him, and begins to sing for him. She begins singing and dancing for him, and this is where we get one of the darker lines that we've seen from Tolkien. Where is it? Okay, here it is. Then Morgoth, looking upon her beauty, conceived in his thought an evil lust, and a design more dark than any that had come into his heart since he fled from Valinor. Thus he was beguiled by his own malice, for he watched her, leaving her free for a while, and taking secret pleasure in thought. So basically, Morgoth was perving on Lúthien in a really disturbing way. And while he is distracted, Lúthien raises herself up and uses her song to cast one of the largest sleeping spells that she has ever cast, and it takes out his entire court. They all fall asleep, even Beren, because Beren is still sort of slinking off to the side in his wolf disguise. And the only person still awake is Morgoth, and he's just dazed. But Lúthien knows that she can still take him out, and so she casts her cloak before his eyes and set upon him a dream, dark as the outer void where once he walked alone. And so she basically uses her cloak, which is woven with a sleeping spell, and applies it to him directly. And this is enough to make him fall over and finally fall asleep. And when he does, the iron crown falls from his head. And that's when Lúthien wakes up Beren, takes off his disguise and tells him, "Okay, time to do your work." And Beren goes to the crown and takes Angrist and carves out one of the Silmarils. And he holds it, and it's not doing anything to him. It's not hurting him in any way, and it's this beautiful, brilliant light. And that's when Beren makes a mistake. He says, "I've got it here. I got the knife. I'm just gonna take all three." And so he begins to pry away the second one, but in doing so, Angrist snaps. The dagger snaps, and a shard of it hits Morgoth in the face, and that wakes him up. And in doing so, he begins to revive the rest of his court and the rest of his minions. But Beren and Lúthien still have some time, and so they immediately flee back up out of Angband. And they're not really waylaid by anybody in Angband because everybody is still asleep and still recovering. But when they get to the gate, they do run into somebody. They run into Carcharoth again. He is now fully awake. And he knows what they are, and so Beren tries challenging him with the Silmaril. He's holding the Silmaril up in front of Carcharoth, and Carcharoth does something rather unexpected. He bites off Beren's hand and swallows the Silmaril. And now Carcharoth doesn't know what this is, but as soon as he swallows the Silmaril, it lets off light inside of him, and it just drives him mad. It drives him completely insane. And he just takes off running. He is now a completely wild beast that has been driven insane, and he has this powerful jewel inside of him. And meanwhile, Beren is handless. He is now missing a hand. He's wounded again. There was also venom in Carcharoth's bite, and so now he is dying of venom poisoning. And Lúthien does her best to get the poison out, but he's still losing blood. He's still dying, and that's when we have another one of our favorite Tolkien tropes. Where is it? Deus Ex Eagles. Thorondor has been watching them this whole time at the bidding of Huon, and he goes down with a couple of his friends, and they grab Beren and Lúthien and carry them back to Doriath. And in doing so, they actually fly over Gondolin, and you can see it in that image there where they're flying over Gondolin, and Lúthien sees it. I don't think this really applies to anything, but it's a nice little it's a nice moment. They get back to Doriath, and they're still on the outskirts. They don't go back into Menegroth, into the kingdom. And Lúthien heals Beren's wounds again with her love and with her magic. And again, they spend their time in the woods recovering, walking through the woods. But then eventually Beren says, "We can't just wander like this. We need to face your father. We need to go back to Menegroth, and I need to tell him what has happened." And so eventually they go back into Menegroth and approach King Thingol. And Beren says, I have come for the hand of your daughter. And Thingol basically says, "Well, what about the quest?" And Beren says, I fulfilled the quest. In my hand is a Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth. And Thingol says, well, show it to me. And so Beren first shows his empty left hand, and then he shows his stump on his right hand and says, the Silmaril is in my hand. But the hand is in the stomach of a wild beast. And then he recounts the whole story of what happened, and that's when Thingol finally realizes that there is something powerful behind Beren. There is something else working here, and it's what Melian, his wife, has been telling him all this time, that there's a power that is driving Beren on. And he realizes it finally and consents, even though he didn't technically fulfill the quest, or he did. It's a weird thing, but he consents to give Beren Lúthien's hand in marriage, and they are wed. And while Beren has been telling this story, we've been introduced to two captains of Thingol's group. There's Mablung and Beleg, also known as Beleg Strongbow, and they've been giving him messages about a wild beast that is terrorizing the outskirts of Doriath. And sure enough, that wild beast is in fact Carcharoth, with the Silmaril inside him. And so, what was I gonna say? So, they put together a hunting party to go after Carcharoth. And it's Beren, Thingol, Mablung, and Beleg. Yeah, wrong, Josh, wrong. Okay. And so, Mablung and Beleg join Thingol and Beren in an attempt to hunt down and kill Carcharoth before he destroys too much. And they eventually find Carcharoth at a waterfall. And they attempt to sneak up on him, but Carcharoth sees Thingol and begins to attack him, or starts lunging after him. And that's when Beren jumps in his way and begins fighting Carcharoth, and that's when so Beren is fighting Carcharoth, and that's when out of the bushes comes Huan. And Huan dives onto Carcharoth, and they have the most knockdown, drag-out wolf battle you can imagine. They're just tearing each other apart. This is the epic battle that was foretold would be Huan's fate. And eventually Huan kills Carcharoth. But he's so wounded that he himself is dying. And that was his fate. He knew that he would die in this battle. And Beren himself is also gravely injured. And so Huan goes up to the wounded Beren and uses his words for the third and last time to bid him farewell. And Beren pats him on the head, and Huan dies. And that's when then Thingol has, I think it's Mablung, cuts into Carcharoth and pulls out the Silmaril. And Thingol gives it to Beren, hoping that it will in some way help to heal him. And it does help him to recover a bit, at least enough to speak. And where is it? Yeah, and so Beren says to Thingol, "Now is the quest achieved, and my doom full wrought." And they carry Beren back to Doriath, but the truth is, or they carry him back to Menegroth, but the truth is his wounds are just too grave, and he is going to die. And Lúthien sees this, and she goes to him and she drapes herself over him and says, to him, "Wait for me in the halls of Mandos," because that's where elf spirits go when they die. Where men spirits go, no one really knows, but she suspects that they go through the halls of Mandos as sort of like a way station to wherever they're going next. And she says, "Wait for me there." And then Beren dies. And his spirit does go to the halls of Mandos, where he does wait. He doesn't move on. He waits for Lúthien to join him. And eventually Lúthien does succumb to her own grief and passes away. There we go. And her spirit goes to the halls of Mandos, and she begins to beg Mandos to let me see if I can find exactly what she's begging him for. She just sings to Mandos, and Mandos is so moved by her song that he eventually calls in Manwë, the Lord of the Valar, King of Arda, and yeah, it's like Lúthien. The song of Lúthien before Mandos was the song most fair that even in words that ever in words was woven, and the song most sorrowful that ever the world shall hear. Unchanged, imperishable, it is sung still in Valinor beyond the hearing of the world, and listening the Valar grieved. And so eventually Manwë comes in, and he hears her pleas, and he takes this all the way up to Ilúvatar, and trying to find some solution to this problem. And finally, Manwë comes back to her and offers her a choice. And this is the choice that all half-elves will be given for time immemorial. Okay. These were the choices that he gave to Lúthien. Because of her labors and her sorrow, she should be released from Mandos and go to Valimar, there to dwell until the world's end among the Valar, forgetting all griefs that life had ever known. Thither Beren could not come, for it was not permitted to the Valar to withhold death from him, for which was the gift of Ilúvatar to men. But the other choice was this, that she might return to Middle-earth, and take with her Beren, there to dwell again, but without certitude of life or joy. Then she would become mortal, and subject to a second death, even as he. And ere long, she would leave the world forever, and her beauty become only a memory in song. And and so this is the choice. She can either stay an elf and be released and live for eternity in Valinor, or she can go back to Middle-earth and live a mortal life with Beren. So you can guess what she chose. she chooses a mortal life. And she and Beren return to Middle-earth. Now we're going to go a little bit into the next chapter, because the beginning of the next chapter does continue talking about them and gives them a proper ending. And so Lúthien returns to Doriath to say farewell to Melian and Thingol, her parents, because she is now mortal, and Melian sees this immediately. Melian sees immediately that that Lúthien is mortal and will eventually die and leave existence, or leave what they are, leave the realm where the Valar and the Maiar can go. And this is the most grievous thing that she could. This is beyond grief for her, because she is losing her daughter completely. Light of the King is asking, so were you saying that this was the first time that elves were given this choice to be mortal or to live on in eternity? Yes, this is the first time this choice was given to them. Now, it's given to many others later on, but this is the first time the choice was given. And Lúthien chose a mortal life. Now, there are others who will choose to be elves, like Elrond. So eventually, they have to. Lúthien says farewell to Melian and Thingol, and she and Beren move on to an island, not too far from Doriath, but completely isolated, called Tol Galen. And that's where they will live out the rest of their days, without a... Let's see, how does it go? Yeah. Then Beren and Lúthien went forth alone, fearing neither thirst nor hunger, and they passed beyond the river Geli and into Osiriand, and there dwelt in Tol Galen, the Green Isle, in the midst of Adurant, until all tidings of them ceased. The Eldar afterwards called that country Dor Finguinar, the land of the dead that live. And there was born Dior Aranel the Beautiful, who was after known as Dior Eluchil, which is Thingol's heir. No mortal man spoke ever again with Beren, son of Barahir, and none saw Beren or Lúthien leave the world, or marked where at last their bodies lay. And Light of the King is asking, when Beren comes back to life, does he get his hand back? I don't know. It never really says whether or not he got his hand back. I'd like to think that he got his hand back, because that's kind of a dick move on the part of the Valar to bring him back to life but still leave him with only one hand. And so yes, Marvel says, and they lived happily ever after, and they did. Beren and Lúthien lived a good long life in Tol Galen, not really a part of the world anymore, but their daughter Dior will play a part later on, and the story of Beren and Lúthien and the things that they accomplished have gone all over Middle-earth, and they have sparked a new fire. It sparks a new fire of determination in the elves, because now the adventures of Beren and Lúthien have shown the rest of Middle-earth just how vulnerable Morgoth really is. And so that will lead us into the next chapter, where everybody will begin to rally around one banner to try to take out Morgoth for good and for good. Eravandi is saying the hand dissolved into dust when they cut it out of Karkaroth's stomach. That's true, it did, but that doesn't mean they couldn't like regenerate it. I don't know. And yeah, I did forget to mention that. Yeah. So that is the story of Beren and Lúthien. So what is everybody talking about here? Okay, I'll just keep going. Temple's saying, I think Tolkien, as someone who served in war, may have had an inclination towards someone staying injured. Just a theory, though. No, that's a fair theory. It isn't really said in the book whether or not Beren got his hand back. He may have gotten it back. He may not have. There are good arguments made for both. It might be expanded upon in other versions of the story, which I haven't gotten to yet. So there may be another version of the story, like in the Unfinished Tales or in the History of Middle Earth, that talks about that and says specifically whether or not he got his hand back. But I unfortunately haven't read that and didn't research it, so I don't know for sure. So I don't want to say. But if I do find out, I'll let you know. I Saw the One Ring is saying that was sad and happy at the same time. Yeah, it's a very powerful story because there is a lot of death in it, though. We have the great character of Huon, who I loved, and he dies in a very epic way. We have Finrod Felagund, the king of Nargothrond, who has been a great character through many, many chapters in this book, dying defending Beren. So there's a lot of death in this, and there's a lot of tragedy in this, but there's also a lot of joy in it. And like as Tolkien says in the very beginning of this chapter, he actually prefaces it by saying, "This is actually a happy story, folks." Let's see, where is it? Yeah. Here we go. Among the tales of sorrow and of ruin that come down to us from the darkness of those days, there are yet some in which, amid weeping, there is joy, and under the shadow of death, light that endures. And of these histories, most fair still in the ears of the elves is the tale of Beren and Lúthien. And so that's Tolkien's very eloquent way of saying, "Don't worry, this one's got a happy ending, folks." And it does have a happy ending. Marfles is asking, Aragorn singing their song is also in the book or only in the movie? I believe it's also in the book, because Aragorn has always felt very tied to Beren, and his relationship to Arwen is very much he's tied it very closely to the tale of Beren and Lúthien, and rightly so, because it is very much the same kind of tale. Mm-hmm. So that's the story of Beren and Lúthien. Now, this is why I personally love this story, because it is a full fleshed out story. It's got a good beginning, middle, and an end, and I think that it's one of the few that you could isolate from the Silmarillion and make into its own standalone movie. I would say it should probably be in 2 movies. Like, there's a lot you can expand on. There's the character of Daeron, the minstrel who is in love with Lúthien, who basically rats out Beren to Thingol, and there could be a subplot with him. Aravandi is asking, weren't Beren and Lúthien Aragorn's ancestors? Yes, they were. Because Aragorn comes from a long line of Númenóreans, and Númenóreans descend from the House of Beor, and the House of Beor is Beren is one of the last. But yeah, I think that Beren and Lúthien would make a great movie. Maybe two. Like I could see like, and it's sort of what I did with this. Like part one would go all the way up to their battle with Sauron. And then part two would be everything beyond that to the Battle of Morgoth. The only downside to a movie of this, like this, is that there's a lot that happens after the climax, after they escape Angband, because they still have to talk to Thingol. They still have to fight Karkaroth. They still have to get the Silmaril back. Beren and Lúthien both die, go to the halls of Mandos, and then are reborn. So there's a lot that happens. So, like, I think you could probably get two solid movies out of this. Marfels is saying you can make one single movie out of this story. You could. You definitely could, but I feel like it would you wouldn't get enough time to like really appreciate the story. You'd have to go through every plot point very fast, every character beat really fast. So I like, and I would want to spend time with it. I would want to have like a good natural progression with the relationship of Beren and Lúthien, and to see that grow and flourish. And I don't want that to be rushed. I would want to see that sort of happen naturally and go along for the ride, because it is such a beautiful story. So that's why I would, if I were a producer who was in charge of the Marvel or the Middle Earth cinematic universe, I would say Beren and Lúthien could be two movies, or should be two movies, and then I'd come up with some goofy subtitle for each one. That's about all I can think to say about Beren and Lúthien. Now it is very self-contained, but it also plays into the much larger story, like the fact that this whole story happened will send a message out to the world that Morgoth is vulnerable and that Angband can be assailed. And so it's going to reignite a lot of passions, and it's going to reignite a lot of desires for people, for the elves who have just gone through a devastating defeat, to rally and to try again. So, and that's what we're going to get into in next week in a battle called Nirnaeth. I'm going to destroy the pronunciation of this term. I'm sorry. It's called Nirnaeth Arnoediad. And it's a translation is kind of spoilery, so I don't want to say what it is. But it's one of the great battles of Beleriand. It's another game changer. It's going to be a truly epic battle that will lead into another one of the major self-contained stories of the Silmarillion, the story, and a much sadder and more tragic story, the story of Turin Turambar. So next week, Ervandi's saying Nirnaeth Arnoediad. It's hard to even type it out. It really is. It's a very weird name, or it's a very weird sounding, weird looking name, but it's a very powerful name. But again, I don't want to say what the translation is, because it's kind of it's almost spoilery. because it kind of lets you know how the battle turns out. So next week we'll be discussing the Nir Naeth Arnwadiad, or just the fifth battle. And then I believe the week after that, we will be discussing. Next week will be the fifth battle, and then the week after that will be the Princess Bride, which I'm looking forward to talking. This whole month has been kind of between the Princess Bride and Beren and Lúthien. This has been a real month of romance and high adventure. Those are some great themes for a whole month. It was not my intention to have it go that way, but it's kind of fun that it did. Marples is asking me, how do I know how to pronounce them? Through two ways. One is there is a pronunciation guide in the Silmarillion. Two, I have the audiobook. And the audiobook, the narrator for the audiobook does a really good job of doing the Elvish pronunciations. So that's been very helpful. So it makes me sound way more expert than I really am. It's all just a big cheat, folks. I really don't know what I'm talking about. So yeah, that'll leave us here for this week. Next week, the big fifth battle, and then the week after that, the Princess Bride, and then we'll keep going. I have to redo the schedule because I'm expanding some episodes. Like I was originally going to do Beren and Lúthien in one episode. I was originally going to do Turin Turambar in one episode, just to keep it so that it would wrap up at the end of August. But really, Beren and Lúthien, Turin Turambar, the rise and fall of Numenor, it's too much to do in one episode each. So those are all going to be 2 episodes each. So it's actually adding 3 more weeks to the schedule. So we'll be wrapping up probably around the end of September, and I need to plot this out and make sure that this doesn't compete with or conflict with our Baggins birthday picnic in September. Thank you, Light of the King. And thank you all for joining me on for joining me for this. Marfles is saying I only got half the show, but it was good enough. Well, the good thing is, Marfles, in a couple hours, the entire episode will be up on YouTube, so you can watch what you missed. Yeah. Thank you all for joining me. This has been one of my favorite stories from the Silmarillion, and I was really glad to talk to you about it. So I will see you all next week, and yeah, never stop reading.